remote sandstone canyons of the Utah desert, a team of biologists tracking sheep make a shocking discovery.
Completely unearthly image. It's this big triangular prism, about 12 feet tall.
A strange glint of light pierced the isolation, catching the attention of a team of geological surveyors conducting a routine aerial scan. What they found would shake the scientific community into a frenzy of urgency and speculation. A towering, mirror-like structure partially embedded in the desert floor, perfectly geometric and utterly alien in appearance. The moment the discovery was confirmed on the ground, researchers and scientists across various disciplines scrambled to understand the nature, origin, and implications of this anomaly. Now referred to in scientific circles simply as Object 13, this finding marked a critical point in our understanding of the unexplored and possibly the unknowable. Before we start, hit the like and subscribe buttons for more exclusive news. The object stood over 12 feet tall, made from a metallic alloy unlike any commonly used in modern construction or aerospace engineering. Unlike typical monoliths or installations, it bore no seams, rivets, or evidence of human manufacture. Its surface reflected the landscape like a two-way mirror, camouflaging it so thoroughly that it had escaped detection for years. As researchers approached, they noted an almost magnetic pull, a low hum vibrating just below the threshold of human hearing, detectable only through specialized instruments. This was no art installation, no leftover military relic. Its composition was beyond anything the geological team had encountered, prompting immediate alerts to national scientific organizations and international research bodies. Upon initial examination, the object's material confounded metallurgists. It was resistant to every conventional method of analysis. Laser scanning, X-ray diffraction, and high-frequency resonance tests yielded nothing conclusive. What they did discover, however, was even more perplexing. The structure was not anchored to the ground in any typical fashion. Instead, it seemed to hover just millimeters above the desert surface, imperceptibly floating yet unwavering in its position. This defied every known principle of physics related to mass, gravity, and structural stability. The mystery deepened, and the sense of urgency escalated. As more specialists arrived on site, additional features emerged. A thin electromagnetic field surrounded the structure, impervious to external frequencies. Radio signals bent around it, GPS coordinates scrambled within its immediate vicinity, and compasses spun wildly when brought close. Data collection drones malfunctioned or returned corrupted information. Traditional scientific tools failed one by one, forcing the scientists to resort to more analog observational methods to glean insight. And yet, every day brought with it more questions than answers. What concerned the scientific community most wasn't just the structure itself, but what its presence suggested. Embedded within its alloy were trace elements not naturally found on Earth, extremely rare isotopes that usually appear only in cosmic environments like neutron stars or supernova remnants. These elements were not just present, they were purposefully arranged in patterns suggesting intentional design. Crystallography models revealed geometric formations that did not conform to any known periodic structure. The implications were staggering. This was not a freak natural occurrence. It had to be a construct, but by whom or by what remained beyond comprehension. Moreover, the placement of the object in the Utah desert appeared deliberate. Its position aligned with celestial bodies in a way that mirrored ancient astronomical observatories, though this structure's alignment shifted ever so slightly each night as if it were tracking something beyond the sky. Theories poured in, from astrophysicists, cryptologists, geologists, and even linguists, each trying to decode the object's behavior and meaning. Some posited it was a beacon. Others suggested it was a probe. A few dared to wonder if it was a message, waiting for the right moment, or the right recipient to activate. The scientific community had issued a red alert not simply because the object was unexplainable, but because its presence carried implications that far exceeded the boundaries of geology or metallurgy. A red alert in scientific terms meant a phenomenon posed an immediate and profound shift to current paradigms. If the structure had extraterrestrial origins, it would redefine humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos. If it were from a forgotten civilization, it would upend timelines and rewrite anthropological history. Neither possibility offered comfort, Both required the rapid restructuring of scientific, philosophical, and cultural foundations. As weeks passed, instruments began detecting subtle changes. The object emitted low-frequency pulses, occurring at mathematically consistent intervals. The pulses did not correspond to any known communication protocol, but they weren't random. Researchers began to suspect these emissions were not merely passive energy signatures, but deliberate outputs. Theories ranged from attempts at communication to passive scanning or data gathering. The pulses caused minor but measurable distortions in the surrounding air pressure and even seemed to influence the local wildlife, which began to behave erratically around the site. Migratory birds flying in unnatural patterns, insects clustering inexplicably near the structure, and coyotes howling at midday for no discernible reason. At night, infrared imaging revealed faint patterns along the object's surface, like circuitry or calligraphy, glowing momentarily before vanishing. These patterns bore resemblance to no known written language, yet their recurring symmetries implied intention. Computational linguists tried mapping them using algorithms designed for dead languages, but no breakthrough came. The patterns seemed dynamic, changing with the ambient temperature, the phase of the moon, and even shifts in atmospheric pressure. The object was not static. It was reacting to its environment, learning, perhaps evolving. Scientists began working in round-the-clock shifts, building a perimeter around the site, shielding it from public knowledge and potential interference. Still, whispers of the event began to spread, and the scientific red alert served as a warning flare. Whatever this thing was, it was not inert. And it was not benign. Not in the sense of being neutral. It was active. Whether it was curious, observant, or something else entirely remained impossible to determine. But it was interacting with its environment in increasingly complex ways. Attention turned to the subsurface area beneath the object. Ground-penetrating radar failed to return coherent results. Each scan returned contradictory data, showing solid rock, then empty caverns, then inexplicable voids. Drilling was out of the question, as any mechanical attempt to disturb the object led to immediate equipment failure. Even seismic readings taken miles away were affected, showing localized disturbances that appeared to shield the object from intrusion. It was as though the structure projected an invisible dome, not of physical material but of effect. A zone where natural laws bent just enough to make human tools obsolete. What truly escalated concern, however, was the object's temporal interference. Time inside its immediate vicinity behaved strangely. Researchers reported time distortions, watching their digital instruments skip seconds or loop milliseconds indefinitely. A pair of scientists, after just 45 minutes inside the inner research tent, emerged to find that 5 hours had passed outside. This temporal dilation was not theoretical. It was measurable, reproducible, and utterly unprecedented. If the structure could manipulate or influence time, even slightly, the consequences were incalculable. Meanwhile, theoretical physicists began speculating whether the object was tapping into higher dimensions, if its material and form were only partially visible in our three-dimensional reality. The idea was not far-fetched. Certain shapes and behaviors of the object aligned more closely with projections of four-dimensional geometry than with anything constrained to our physical understanding. This wasn't just a visitor from another world. It might be a manifestation from another layer of reality entirely. Then came the gravitational shifts. Sensitive instruments began to detect minor, localized changes in gravity around the site, barely perceptible to humans but significant in scientific terms. These changes followed no predictable pattern. In some instances, objects weighed slightly more or less depending on their orientation near the monolith. Some speculated that the object was using gravitational lensing as a method of data transmission or environmental scanning. Others feared it might be capable of exerting gravitational force on a scale large enough to alter tectonic stability. At every stage, the object's mystery deepened. With every new discovery, humanity's grasp of its own scientific certainties slipped a little further. The object in the Utah desert was a mirror, both literal and symbolic, reflecting not just light, but the limitations of human understanding. It asked questions without speaking, raised answers without explanation, and disrupted the comfortable assumption that all things on Earth are of Earth. Public awareness had not yet fully erupted, but within the scientific community, a sense of urgency bordering on dread had taken hold. Some warned against attempting to probe further, citing ethical and existential risks, Others insisted that understanding the object could lead to the greatest scientific leap in human history. The arguments raged in conference calls, secure forums, and late-night lab sessions. But no consensus could be reached because the object refused to yield its truth. Amid the frenzy, one chilling possibility began to take shape. What if the object was not just observing? What if it was a trigger? A marker that, when discovered, began a countdown or initiated a process still invisible to human senses. This wasn't science fiction. This was the conclusion drawn by several of the world's foremost mathematicians and theoretical engineers analyzing the data patterns. Subtle changes in atmospheric pressure and magnetic flux were occurring globally, each one traceable back to the object's moment of discovery. Whether correlation or causation, no one could say. At its core, the object represented the first undeniable sign of a non-human intelligence or influence on Earth. Its silence was louder than any signal, its stillness more profound than any motion. It defied scrutiny while inviting it, destabilized natural laws while enforcing new ones, and stood as an emissary of something that might not even care to be known. And that was perhaps the most unsettling implication of all, that humanity had found something not because it was meant to be found, but simply because the time had come. As investigations continued, another layer of realization dawned upon those who had spent weeks near the monolith. Dreams began to change. Scientists who had never believed in the paranormal found themselves waking from vivid, near-lucid visions, scenes of starless skies, unfamiliar planets, vast machines moving silently through oceans of light. Some of these images overlapped in detail, described identically by individuals who had never spoken to each other. The subconscious minds of those near the structure seemed to be sinking, forming a tapestry of images that suggested a narrative, one which no one could fully interpret, but all felt. More troubling still were the inexplicable behavioral shifts. Some researchers grew obsessive, refusing to leave the site, speaking in patterns or fragments of language they couldn't later remember. Others became emotionally detached, as if the object was altering their neural patterns in subtle, imperceptible ways. Medical scans revealed no anomalies, but the psychological effects were undeniable. If the object was a form of intelligence, it might not be communicating with language or sound, but through resonance, emotion, or thought. Through all of this, the object stood silent, unmoved, and unyielding. It didn't need to move to act, didn't need to speak to be heard. It became a gravity well for the imagination, intellect, and fear of a species that suddenly realized it might not be the apex of understanding. Every hour spent near it unraveled another layer of certainty, another brick in the fortress of human self-assurance. And still, it waits. Shimmering under the desert sun, half seen against the red dust and jagged rocks of Utah, Object 13 stands as a sentinel, or perhaps a gate. It remains untouched, unknowable, and implacable. It doesn't demand worship or fear, but it inspires both. It may be nothing more than a monument left behind by forces long departed, or the beginning of a new chapter in the story of life on Earth. What is certain is that its discovery marks the end of one era of understanding and the trembling edge of another. The red alert continues, not because of danger alone, but because of possibility. Because somewhere in the silence of the desert, something ancient or unimaginably new has made itself known. Not with noise, but with presence. And that presence has changed everything. Even as the scientific world remained consumed by the implications of the monolithic discovery in Utah, the scope of its influence was quietly expanding beyond the boundaries of research tents and laboratory discourse. The object, so inert in appearance, was having measurable effects not only on instruments and immediate surroundings, but also on the fabric of interrelated scientific systems once thought to be independent. These developments did not duplicate the earlier anomalies. They introduced an entirely new phase of mystery, one that stretched across disciplines previously uninvolved, and hinted that the object was not simply present, but integrated into some larger, perhaps planetary mechanism. One of the most unexpected domains to be drawn into the analysis was climatology. Within weeks of the object's discovery, high-altitude weather patterns began to demonstrate unseasonal fluctuations. Jet streams that had held consistent patterns for decades suddenly meandered, shifting their boundaries in ways that affected precipitation patterns across the western United States. Satellites monitoring atmospheric data registered strange vertical updrafts in the vicinity of the Utah site. These updrafts defied traditional heat convection theories. They appeared to originate without a corresponding ground temperature rise and had peculiar rotational signatures, like miniature cyclones ascending rather than spiraling outward. Such weather behavior led researchers to reconsider the object not as a passive anomaly, but as an environmental node, possibly a transmitter or sensor that interacted with larger terrestrial systems. Some atmospheric scientists proposed that the object was engaged in data sampling on a planetary scale, gauging climate behavior and potentially even affecting it, not through brute force, but via precision-level manipulation of localized energy gradients. Though the cause and effect relationship was still speculative, the evidence grew daily that Earth itself was responding to this presence. This prompted another area of inquiry: geobiology. The region surrounding the object began to experience micro-scale biological changes. Soil samples taken from the site began to yield unusual bacterial formations, previously undocumented strains showing accelerated mutation cycles. These microbes exhibited remarkable resilience to radiation and chemical exposure, as though evolving rapidly under some new form of stress or stimulus. Botanists working with desert flora nearby observed strange phototropic behavior. Cacti and other native plants began angling themselves not toward the sun as expected, but subtly toward the object itself, as though drawn by something unseen, a kind of luminous or energetic attraction. The implications of biological systems interacting with a non-biological structure in such a targeted way were profound. Was the object emitting signals that only organic systems could detect? Could it be experimenting intentionally or inadvertently with environmental adaptation? If the object was in fact a probe, might its purpose be to observe the life systems of Earth, down to the microbial level, assessing their ability to respond to subtle energetic cues? Compounding these questions was a new development from the domain of acoustic physics. Researchers installed high-sensitivity audio equipment around the object to measure its electromagnetic and vibrational output across all wavelengths. For days, the instruments captured nothing unusual. Then, without warning, they picked up faint rhythmic pulses, not random noise, but structured sequences that bore the hallmarks of tonality. These tones hovered around subsonic frequencies inaudible to the human ear but entirely measurable. More intriguingly, they seemed to follow scales resembling harmonic intervals, suggesting the object was not only emitting energy, but doing so with a kind of intentional order. Acousticians propose that these tones could serve as environmental probes, using vibration to map internal structures or geological layers deep beneath the Earth's crust. But the pattern of emission did not match the behavior of any known geosurvey equipment. Instead, the intervals suggested resonance with biological systems, matching the frequencies of human brainwave states such as alpha and theta waves associated with dreamlike consciousness. This revelation introduced yet another layer of complexity. What if the object was interfacing with consciousness itself? Neuroscientists were quickly brought into the fold. Researchers who had spent extended time at the site began to report altered cognitive states, not just in dreams, but in waking life, heightened intuition, momentary flashes of insight, even changes in memory retention and sensory perception. These subjective experiences were difficult to quantify, but functional MRI scans revealed subtle changes in the limbic and prefrontal cortex regions of some individuals post-exposure. It was as if proximity to the object stimulated parts of the brain not typically engaged in daily cognition, regions more associated with abstract thinking, imagination, and even empathy. No single discipline could make sense of all this. The object was not only disrupting tools and theories, it was dissolving the very boundaries between fields. It sat at the center of a vortex, pulling in physics, biology, geology, psychology, and more. An interdisciplinary riddle that refused to be solved in isolation. As a result, research teams began to form hybrid working groups, pairing physicists with philosophers, cryptographers with linguists, botanists with artificial intelligence developers. This unprecedented collaboration represented both the magnitude of the challenge and a tacit admission. The object might not yield to scientific reductionism. It demanded synthesis. In one such collaborative breakthrough, a team of cryptographers and quantum information theorists began to suspect that the object's surface was not just decorative or symbolic, but computational. Its patterns bore fractal characteristics with recursive motifs. When mapped using advanced compression algorithms, the patterns resisted entropy in ways similar to optimized code. Further analysis suggested that these arrangements could encode data, potentially massive volumes of it, layered in such a way that each micropattern served as both symbol and storage. The structure could be a repository, an archive perhaps, containing information far beyond the capacity of any terrestrial database. If you liked this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, could you leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on this mysterious Utah desert discovery? What do you expect next? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.